When you have a position that is really deep and loaded in talent in an NFL draft, what usually happens is you'll have some prospects that in a lot of other years would have been much higher draft picks, end up going low and much lower than frankly maybe they should, and they end up proving out and bearing out to be steals and really good value picks. It's something we saw play out in the 2014 NFL draft with the wide receiver position. In a lot of ways, I look at it potentially happening again with the 2015 NFL draft with the wide receiver position. Another really good, really deep and talented group of wide receivers. And one guy that fits into that category to me of a guy that in a lot of other wide receiver classes would be the number 1 or number 2 guy on the board, but this year is lucky to be in the top 5 is Jaelen Strong from Arizona State. This is a prospect that I like. This is a prospect that I like quite a bit. This is a prospect that in a lot of other drafts, like let's say 2013 or 2011, we're talking about for sure maybe a top 10, no worse than top 15 pick. But with other guys in this draft class like Kevin White and Amari Cooper and Dorial Green-Beckham and guys like Devontae Parker, you're talking about a Jaelen Strong that might be lucky to be drafted in the first round. It speaks to the depth and value at the wide receiver position this year. But there are a lot of things that point to Jaelen Strong being a first-round talent. Some of the biggest things I like about his game include his strength. That's perhaps his single biggest aspect. You're talking about a guy that's almost 6'3", about 215 pounds, and he plays up to that size. You see that strength and physicality at all levels of his game. He also has more than that, though. He's a guy with more speed than he's given credit for with really, really good leaping ability. So he is a guy that can stretch the top of an opposing defense and is able to go up and get the ball at its highest point, make those spectacular catches, use his physicality to create the necessary separation to make those really tough in-traffic catches that the special receivers make and the other ones do not. Again, he really uses his body and his strength well to fight off defenders in close areas, especially, again, when he's going up to get the ball. He does a good job, too, it seems to me, of adjusting to those balls that aren't the best thrown. He's the guy that can catch that back shoulder fade that is a little off the mark. He's the guy that can really go up and get that jump ball fade that is a little bit out of where it should be. But he's also a guy, too, that once he catches the ball in the short and intermediate era, he runs very physically. He's a guy that can gain some yards after the catch, in part because he's a very big load to try and bring down in the open field. He runs with aggression. He runs with physicality. So a lot to like about Jaelen Strong's game. But why do I view Jaelen Strong as kind of like a second-tier prospect and outside of that top 3 to 4 in this draft class? Well, first I look at him and I say he lacks big-time quickness to easily create separation at the NFL level. He struggled to do that at college. It's only going to get worse at the NFL level. With that lack of real initial burst and quickness, too often he has to rely upon his strength and physicality to be able to get separation and get open, to get into his position where a quarterback can hit him within his catch radius. As a result, that means that it's easier for corners to get up on him, corners to stay on him, and that could lead to some problems with offensive pass interference penalties at the NFL level for a guy like Jaelen Strong, in large part because not only does he lack that great initial big-time quickness and burst off of the line, his route running really needs work. He rounds off too many routes. He doesn't have explosiveness in and out of the breaks. His footwork could get a lot better. The way he utilizes his body to set up his routes and set up his breaks could be a lot better. The scary thing about Jaelen Strong is as good as he is physically and as good of an athlete as he is, especially in terms of his speed once he gets going, he could be so much more and so much better if he developed his route running. It's something that he can get better at, but it's something he's going to really have to work with. Another thing he's going to have to really work on is at times he dropped too many easy throws, too many of the routine, natural, nothing special about him catches. It's great that he can go and make those spectacular big-time special plays that very few wide receivers can do. That's the type of trait you look for out of an NFL wide receiver, especially a number 1 type of NFL wide receiver. But at times, again, part of being a number 1 wide receiver is being the guy that can be counted on consistently. And there are times throughout Jaelen Strong's last 2 years at Arizona State where he dropped some really easy throws, which makes me question whether you could really count on him as a consistent weapon as a number 1 wide receiver at the NFL level. He also lacks elusiveness in the open field. In a lot of ways, once Jaelen Strong catches the ball, that's pretty much it. I mean, he does run physically, yes, and he can gain a few yards after the catch. But instead of being a guy that could take a 5-yard slant and turn it into a 30-yard gain, he's a guy more so that catches the 8-yard route on 3rd and 9 and turns it into a 10 or 11-yard gain because he's hard to bring down with one defensive back and he can fight through physically. But he's not somebody that's going to really wow you with his ability after the catch, at least based off of what I've seen the last 2 years at Arizona State. Now, when I look for a comparison for him at the NFL level, I'm sure a lot of people might look at somebody like a DeAndre Hopkins, maybe even a Keenan Allen, and I see elements of both of those guys' games in somebody like a Jaelen Strong. But actually, in a lot of ways, who he really reminds me of coming out of college is Jordy Nelson of the Green Bay Packers. Back when Jordy Nelson was at Kansas State, he ended up being a second-round pick. He was faster than people thought he was, but it didn't always necessarily show and translate into his game. Now, Jaelen Strong obviously is more physical and stronger than a Jordy Nelson, but I thought Jordy Nelson did a good job back at Kansas State of using his size and strength to be able to wield off defenders, especially because at that time his route running to me needed work and he lacked big-time quickness and explosiveness to be able to easily create separation was one of those big knocks on Nelson, in my opinion, coming out of Kansas State. But he was a guy that could be so much more with better route running. And that's exactly what Jordy Nelson became. He became one of those really, truly unsung #1 wide receivers at the NFL level. And he can make some real spectacular big-time plays, especially down the field. I don't think Jordy Nelson gets enough credit for the types of quality of plays that he can make, but Nelson at times can also be a little frustrating because he is a guy that will occasionally drop the easy one. His hands sometimes can come and go. And when I look at a Jaelen Strong, there are many elements, while they're not 100% a perfect match, I see a lot of similarities in the game of Jaelen Strong as I do to Jordy Nelson. Faster than people think they are. Guys that need work on their route running and their ability to get separation in part because they lack that big-time initial quickness. That's something that Nelson developed at the NFL level. I anticipate Jaelen Strong can be as well. It can be so much more with better route running. And as a result, becomes that type of unheralded, unsung #1 type of wide receiver. That's what I envision Jaelen Strong as. I think he's a guy that's the #5 wide receiver in a really good wide receiver class in this 2015 NFL draft. And for my money, I look at Jaelen Strong, and I think his range of where he could be drafted is anywhere between pick 20 to pick 40. You know, sometimes it just depends on how the draft plays out and if another receiver runs even faster than him. And Jaelen Strong, again, he's got more speed than people give it credit for. And at times you could see it on film, but at times you really didn't. But I think really Jaelen Strong is a top 20 or top 25 talent in this 2015 NFL draft and could prove out to be a real value pick for somebody picking at the tail end of round #1, looking for a big-time explosive playmaker and a #1 wide receiver at the NFL level.